All right, so this is the third video in the video series talking about what it's like losing your mother. And in the last video, I discussed, in the months following her passing, what it looked like in our life and some of the things that were difficult to have to go through for the first time and what that looked like. And that was in regards to like things at school with the kids, with her with the grandchildren, my children and my nieces and nephews, not having her around, so things at school that would come up, sporting events, posts on Facebook, because whenever they were involved in something, we typically would put, pictures and stuff up on Facebook for our family and stuff. And she was an avid Facebooker. So she was always proud of her grandchildren and, always being a part of all of that. And then lastly, I was talking about, the first birthdays, following that and how difficult they were. And so now moving on, in that first year after this had happened, there's a lot of things here. I didn't write this down. I just honestly decided, I've been thinking about doing this obviously since I created this channel. But doing it today, like I did, was on a whim. And so I wanted to do it because then I thought if I thought too much more about it, I probably wouldn't do it. And so I decided to just go ahead and tough through it and try and bang these out, because I do think that they have the potential to touch somebody out there. Hopefully in a positive way, even though this is a heavy topic. But the next thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure I'm going to be missing a lot, because like I said, I didn't prepare anything here. There's many things, but the next thing that comes to mind is the holidays. Dealing with the holidays for the first time, without your mother, and just to try and build this up, which I'm sure I will not do justice to what it actually was like. But my mom, when it came to all holidays, was diehard, and I mean diehard, and especially with Christmas. And she was just a person that loved to give, and she'd be Christmas shopping for the next Christmas, literally days after Christmas. She would be out shopping for next year's Christmas, if you can imagine that. And she would do that all throughout the year, because Christmas was so special and so important to her, especially, once she started having all these grandkids. She just made the holidays, especially Christmas, so special. I have very good memories growing up because of her and how special she made them, and Christmas time in particular. And she loved to decorate. She would go all out decorating, and her love for it obviously, rubbed off on her children, because then, I carried on those same traditions of just decorating like a Chevy Chase, just going all out to decorate. And so do my siblings. and that's all because of her, you know, obviously growing up around it, and then it being so special to you growing up. You obviously want to do the same for your children so that they can have those same memories and view it much of the same way that you do. And so, you know, she just made it so special, and I wanted to make sure that we always carried that on, you know. And so with all that said, like I said, I did not do justice. If you only knew what this looked like with her with Christmas. I mean, she was a Christmas fanatic, and there were times back in the good old early days there when you know, it was just my daughter was the only child, the only grandchild for a while, and then once some of the other grandchildren started to come, my boys, and then all the other nieces and my nieces and nephews, you know, we'd get together at Christmas, and there'd literally be days of I'd have a Christmas party at my house where everybody would come to my house, and you'd have to take numerous vehicles to her house to bring all of the gifts down, because there were that many gifts that she had for everybody, and it was like insane, the amount of gifts, and of course that's what kids love, and so that made it very special for the children. And you know, that's the type of stuff that you miss, you know, during those first holidays without her. Because we had many traditions that we would do around Christmas with her, you know. She was not only a diehard Christmas shopper, but she just loved to shop in general, and she could shop all day. And I remember we tried to, for a while there, have a tradition of going Christmas shopping together, but I'm telling you, I could just not hang with her. It was like my feet were hurting, I'm done like in these stores, and she's just raring to go, to keep going. And I remember we had done that for years, and excuse me, there was a point there where I was like, Mom, I can't do it all day like that. And I talked about, I think in the first video, about regret, and you know, so this is sometimes what that looks like. You know, I began to regret the fact that I had those opportunities and I passed them up, and you know, it's just things like that that come to mind then, you know, at these times. And I remember that being you know, something that I had to work through that first year, were all those regrets around stuff like that, you know. And I still have those same regrets today, but I've managed them differently to try and cope with it in life here. But you know, that first Christmas without her was devastating, because it's at times like that when the void becomes evident of just how big it actually is, you know. Because speaking of traditions, you know, we had many around that time of year. She would come over for Christmas Eve every year, and we had a tradition of doing our Christmas stockings Christmas Eve. And I always thought it was kind of crazy, like, I thought we always did stockings, you know, on Christmas morning, because that's part of like the whole Christmas thing. But we did it this way because of how many gifts there were to be opened on Christmas Day. And she didn't want to have to add the stocking gifts on top of all the other gifts. So we actually made a tradition of doing the stockings on Christmas Eve, just for that reason. And so she would come to our house. She would bring all the kids' stockings, me and my wife, our stockings, and we would have, meme stocking ready for her. And she would come over, and I'd make a dinner. We'd have dinner together, and then we would do cookies. We would make different Christmas cookies, mainly the sugar cookie cutouts. That's what we would do with her. And the kids, always loved it and looked forward to it, and so did I. And then after that, we would, do the stockings. And then before she would leave, we'd get the plate ready for Santa and, all of that type of stuff. And I remember there were a few years there where we had the reindeer dust, and we'd go outside and sprinkle some of the reindeer dust and just different stuff like that. But I remember that first Christmas Eve being extremely, extremely difficult, as I'm sure you can imagine. And Christmas Day was no different. And, when you have kids, Christmas is a time of joy and happiness and, all these positive things. And I just remember the first Christmas, and honestly, I think it's been many Christmases after that where, that gaping hole that was left there just was so profound and evident, at that time of year, that it was just really hard to try and continue in the same manner, just for the kids, to make sure that it remained special for them. And it was very tough, and it just was not the same. And so, Christmases ever since then have been a very difficult time. Probably the most difficult time to have to deal with, aside from, well, it is. It's probably the most difficult time, just because of how big of a deal it was and all the traditions around it. With her, and with the children. And so, it's tough. It's very tough. And then, of course, New Year's, we would typically we would do something, together for New Year's Eve. We would get together at somewhere at someone's house, get together for New Year's Eve. And so that, was difficult. And it's just the sudden dramatic change and the nature of that change that makes it almost uncomprehendable with what it feels like, unless you've experienced it. And so again, like I've said in the other video, and like I plan to say in every video, if you still have your mother, you should do everything in your power to honor her on the daily and to remind her how special she is, how big of a role she's played in your life, and how much you love her. If you still have her, you need to keep that in the forefront of your mind, and you need to make sure she knows it. And I know my mother knew it. I knew my mother knew how much I loved her and how much she meant to me. But if you still got yours around, don't waste those opportunities. And that's the positive message in all of this. This is for people who are going through it, or people who will eventually go through it, to prepare them for what's to come when it happens. But the positive side of this is that's the message. If your mother is still here, you should be worshiping the ground she walks on. So we've again hit that 15-minute mark, so I'm going to cut it off here. I will say in closing, the first year is going to be the first time dealing with, all of these different things. And it's going to be the most difficult time. And it's still difficult today. All of these things are still difficult today. It's still always in my mind. It's still very hard to deal with. But the first year is very, very tough to get through all of these things, and like I said, I've probably missed a bunch of stuff, but just kind of doing this on a whim here, trying to touch the important things that come to mind, and I think we have done that in this video, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. But I thank you for joining me and listening to my story. Hopefully this has touched you in some way. And until the next one, I'm Brad Casper. This is Casper's Corner, and we are out.